very much to us. Practicing gratitude in advance is something I want to touch upon briefly right now because it's very much a spiritual practice. I mentioned earlier that, we've learned how to say thank you afterwards, or at least I'm sure every one of us in this room had a well-intentioned adult reminding us of our P's and Q's and our manners, to say please and to say thank you, and I think that that is very, very important still today, and I think it's, in some places, is almost a dying art, just being courteous and well-mannered. But there's a spiritual practice that involves not just saying thank you afterwards, but saying thank you in advance as a way of opening oneself to the good or the blessing or the miracle or the opportunity that you're wanting to bring into your life. We have a couple of beautiful examples out of Jesus' ministry and life of doing this very thing. When he had been teaching for a number of days and a large crowd had gathered around him, the disciples told him that the crowd was getting restless because he'd been teaching for several days and they were hungry. And the disciples said, let's disperse them. And Jesus said, no, what do we have to feed them? And we're told that when he was given what was available from one young boy, a couple of loaves of bread and a few small fish, that he took those and he gave thanks for them. He took them and he gave thanks for them. He didn't look at them and think, how can I possibly feed this crowd of people with this amount of food? Can you imagine for a moment if we practiced that same technique or that same principle as he did? During these times when we look at our checkbook and the balance in it may be dismally low, that we are grateful for what is there instead of looking at it in terms of what we don't have. The story goes that as he was thankful for what he had, gave thanks in advance, took it and broke it, which meant used and put into circulation what he had, that it was enough to feed the crowd. Was it that that food actually physically multiplied? Perhaps. Some Bible scholars say that maybe it wasn't that at all, but maybe it touched upon the hearts and the generosity of the people in the crowd, because you see in those days when people traveled any distance, they couldn't be guaranteed that there would be a place to stop for food, so they often took food, breads like pita breads, for example, the equivalent of that, and they would put them in their pockets, buried deep in their robes. And some Bible scholars say that it was the act of generosity of that young boy taking what he had and then Jesus blessing and giving thanks for what was given that inspired the rest to share what they had. In some ways, I think that's more of a miracle than the actual multiplying, physically multiplying the food. We know as well that before he raised Lazarus from the dead, that he paused and he gave thanks in advance. So there's a place for thankfulness not just after the fact, but beforehand. And the expression of that beforehand opens the doors to unexpected good. One of the dangers in our teaching of being so aware of visualizing what we want to bring forth, one of the dangers in that is sometimes we don't give God enough room to give us that or something better. The unexpected. And wouldn't you want, if God had in mind for you something better than what you're thinking of, wouldn't you want that? Wouldn't you, right? So we say yes, and we say yes to whatever you have in mind, Spirit. I give thanks in advance so that the good that God has prepared for